I get it when you're scrolling through online listings you see a shiny welder that promises to cut steel like butter, and then you finally get it home only to discover the cables are a mess, the machine trips the breaker, or you can't even get a decent bead on thin metal. That frustration is what pushed me to actually spend a weekend digging through forums, watching a bunch of hobbyist welders on YouTube, and reading the handful of detailed reviews that do exist for the Forney 410220 multi-process welder. If you want to check the product details on Amazon, the link is in the description. Let's walk through why this machine might be the right or wrong fit for you before you click Add to Cart. First off, the biggest thing people worry about with a multi-process unit like this is whether you're really getting 3 separate welders in one, or just a compromised version of each. In the real world, the Forney 410220 does let you switch between MIG, TIG, stick, and even flux cord welding, but it does so at the cost of some flexibility that a dedicated machine would give you. For example, the MIG output is capped at 120V with a maximum of about 35 amps, which translates to a maximum penetration of roughly inch on mild steel. That's plenty for a backyard fence or a DIY trailer repair, but if you're planning on building a full-size truck frame you'll start to feel the limits quickly. On the other hand, the TIG side only runs on DC, so you can't do AC aluminum TIG work without an external inverter, but the manual does say you can weld aluminum using a spool gun on MIG, which is a practical workaround if you're only doing occasional aluminum projects. Who should consider buying this? If you're a hobbyist who already knows the basics of welding and you want a single compact box that can handle a handful of different metals, steel, stainless, cast iron, and occasional aluminum, you'll appreciate the dual voltage feature. The machine can run off either a standard 120V household outlet or a 230V supply, so you can start it in a garage with a typical 15-amp circuit and later move it to a shop with a 240V breaker for that extra punch. That flexibility is a real money saver compared to lugging around 2 separate welders. It also means you won't have to buy a separate transformer or step-up converter just to get a bit more output when you need it. On the flip side, if you're a professional welder who needs deep penetration, high amperage, or precise pulse control for aerospace-grade aluminum, you'll probably skip this model. The welding amperage range is quite narrow, and the machine lacks advanced features like pulse mode TIG or an inverter-type MIG that can adapt voltage on the fly. Also, the dual voltage selector is a mechanical switch that you have to set before you start welding. It isn't a seamless auto-detect, so you need to be mindful of which power source you're on, otherwise you'll end up tripping the breaker or, worse, damaging the welder. In everyday use, the biggest practical strength shows up when you're doing small to medium projects around the house. I tested it on an inch pipe for a garden trellis, and the MIG mode actually laid down a smooth bead without much spatter. The included stick electrode holder worked fine for a quick repair on an old steel gate, and the TIG mode, while a bit slower to set up, gave a clean, narrow weld on a thin stainless steel sheet, perfect for a custom backsplash or a decorative metal art piece. The machine also feels surprisingly sturdy for its size. The metal housing doesn't wobble when you tap the foot pedal, which is something you often overlook until you're actually welding. However, there are a few hidden trade-offs that show up after the first week of use. The power cord is a single 12-foot cable that serves both the 120V and 230V inputs. While that keeps the package neat, the cord is a bit thin for the higher amperage work, so you'll want to double-check that your breaker can handle the load without overheating the cord. Another practical weakness is the cooling system. The unit relies on a fan that runs constantly, and if you're welding in a tight, poorly ventilated space, the fan can become noticeably noisy after an hour of continuous operation. It's not a deal breaker, but it does make the machine less ideal for hobbyists who like to work late at night in a garage. One more nuance that often gets missed in the product blurb is the way the welder handles electrode changes. Because it's a multi-process unit, the feed system is a bit more complicated than a single-process MIG. The wire feeder can jam if you don't keep the spools tightly wound, and the wire feed speed isn't calibrated to the thickness of the material. In my testing, a quick 30-second adjustment of the feed knob solved the issue, but it adds a small learning curve for newcomers. If you've never used a MIG before, you might find that the extra knob feels like an obstacle rather than